My name is Warrant Officer 2nd Class Beliveau from 779 Black Knight Squadron, and I will be the Speaker of the House for this debate. The resolution is, be it resolved that Canada should immediately ratify the Trans-Pacific Partner Agreement. The government will be represented by 800 Black Forest Squadron. The Prime Minister will be represented by Flight Corporal Nabar, and the Minister of the Crown will be represented by Flight Sergeant Cornel. Correct? Close enough. The opposition today will be represented by 724 Midland Lions Squadron. The member of the opposition for this debate will be Sergeant Bennett, and the leader of the opposition will be represented by Sergeant Lethbridge. I ask that all cell phones at this point and similar devices are switched off. This debate has officially begun, and I invite the Prime Minister to make his opening speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, honorable judges, and most welcome guests. The government, myself, and my fellow colleague strongly believe that Canada should immediately ratify the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Mr. Speaker, the government would like to commence this debate by first defining the terms of the resolution. Be it resolved that Canada should immediately ratify the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Canada references to the entire nation and all geographical regions that fall under our political jurisdiction. Ratify means to sign a document that gives formal consent to, making it officially valid on the day that it was signed. And the TPP in this scenario refers to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the CPTPP, which are the 11 countries that border the Pacific Ocean, and this is the new agreement built off of the original TPP. Mr. Speaker, on October 15, 2015, the TPP was drafted with 12 different Pacific bordering nations: Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and the US. The TPP was proposed as a way to strengthen and deepen the economic ties between countries, while at the same time reducing or even eliminating tariffs on agricultural and industrial goods alike. However, before the TPP could be fully ratified by all countries, as it had to do so before Feb 4, 2018, the US pulled out of the agreement, and as a result, it could not go through. However, on March 8, 2018, a new agreement was signed, built off of the TPP, called the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the CPTPP. Its members represent 13.4% of the world's total economy, with a combined GDP of $13.5 trillion. Mr. Speaker, there are a variety of economical benefits that come with the ratification of this agreement. The first is that it will provide Canadian businesses with access to more customers. With a combined population in this agreement, it is close to 500 million people, 495 million to be exact. More importantly, it will provide member countries with key access to Asian markets, including Japan, Malaysia, and Vietnam. It also means that Canada now has a free trade agreement with every one of the G7 countries. G7 countries are the 7 countries in the world with the most advanced economies. In addition to these benefits, Mr. Speaker, the TPP will also lead to more and cheaper exports and imports for Canada. The TPP would not only lead to overall more exports for Canada, but there's also the added advantage of cheaper imports. If we take the beef example with Japan, Canada pays for beef sales 38.5%, and this will gradually decrease to only 9% over a course of 15 years. As well, if Canada were not to join the agreement, beef sales could drop by 66% to Japan, while pork will drop by 13%. However, aside from the economical benefits, there are a variety of industries that benefit from the ratification of this free trade agreement. The first industry that benefits is the automotive industry. With lower production costs, the sector's output becomes more competitive. It exports more and hires more workers as a consequence. Instead of costing jobs, it can actually increase employment. As well, economic impact assessments suggest that Canadian auto exports will increase slightly as a result of the deal, with an increased net gain in production of $206 million. Not only would the automotive industry benefit, but also the dairy industry. Government analysis shows dairy imports to Canada may increase by $135.1 million as a result of the market access given to other CPTPP members. It also foresees an increase of $3.5 million in exports. In addition, Global Affairs Canada maintains its commitment to Canada's supply management system. This is sourced from EDC.trade. As the government sees, Mr. Speaker, these points just prove why we must ratify the CPTPP, also known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Before I introduce the member of the opposition, I would like to remind all debaters of Rule 3.0.4. Only one debater at a time may hold the floor of the House. As soon as another member rises and addresses himself, all other debaters must remain silent. So I would ask that the opposition please cease the conversation on their side. I now introduce the member of the opposition to take the floor.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. So, the government's plan to join in the TPP agreement would abolish all tariffs. Now, how exactly are we going to get the money we need for government-funded programs?
We never introduced
Now,
Mr. Speaker, may I rise to my point of privilege?
What is your point of privilege?
The opposition has stated that the government will join in on the TPP when we specifically said that it's to ratify the CPTPP, which is different from the TPP due to different provisions suspended.
Point well taken, Mr. Prime Minister. I ask that the opposition please formulate their rebuttals on what the government has said. You may continue.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. Just to clarify, the CTPPT.
CPTPP.
So, CPTPP.
CPTPP.
Anyway, this would promote outsourcing to other countries. The minimum wage in Mexico is $4.70 per day. In Vietnam, that's $5.30. Now, Mr. Speaker, why would companies choose Canadian sources of manufacturing when we could outsource to different countries? Now, Mr. Speaker, a Tufts University study conducted found that Canadians would lose 58,000 jobs, and our GDP would decrease by 0.082%. This study was conducted in 2016. And the 0.082 GDP increase would be over a 15-year period and would not be annually at all. The government brought up points on the dairy industry. Now, the Canadian Dairy Commission estimated 250 million liters of milk would be displaced annually. That's $300 million in revenue, Mr. Speaker. The egg board, the egg industry. In Canada, currently, 1 dozen of eggs averages $2.50. Now, Mr. Speaker, in other countries, such as the United States, which is one of our main trading partners at this time, that averages is 49 cents. Now, obviously, these numbers would be devastating to these different industries. The auto industry. The auto industry would be devastated, as only 35 to 40% of the manufacturing and the assembly of these vehicles would only need to be done in Canada. Now, Mr. Speaker, the opposition wants to emphasize how we should definitely not ratify the CPTPP agreement.
CPTPP.
Thank you, member of the opposition. I now invite the Minister of the Crown for his rebuttal.
My apologies, I expected the chair to turn around like those ones. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government would like to start or to continue our case by talking about some humanitarian rights. So the CPTPP reaffirms the importance of promoting corporate responsibility and basic humanitarian rights, such as environmental protection and conservation, labor rights, inclusive trade, sustainable practices, development of traditional knowledge, as well as preserving the right of governments to regulate in the public interest. So this agreement has a comprehensive chapter on obligations to protect labor rights of workers on their internationally recognized principles and rights, preventing parties from deviating from such to gain a profit, and ensuring that laws provide acceptable conditions of work, minimum wages, hours of work, as well as health and safety regulations. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to address your attention to minimum wage. The opposition has stated, and please correct me if I'm wrong, their number for Vietnam was something around $5 minimum wage. The number that we have from the atlas.com is that manufacturing jobs in Vietnam have an annual salary of $2,989, $2,791 in Peru, $1,685 in Mexico. In these same countries, per 1,000 people or per capita, in Mexico, 275 cars. In Peru, 73 cars per 1,000 people. In Vietnam, a measly 23 cars per 1,000 people. That's if the front row in this entire auditorium, Mr. Speaker, had cars, and everyone else had to walk. And furthermore, in Vietnam, 11% of the nation is under the national poverty line. In Peru, that number is 28. In Mexico, 48% of people are under the national poverty line. That's almost half the people living there. That is thousands of people living in poverty, which is why, Mr. Speaker, we strongly believe that the CPTPP, my apologies, look at me making the same mistake, shall pass. Because it enforces these chapters on labor rights, and they're specific, and they are very, very much measurable and enforceable. Next up, we have environmental chapter. CPTPP includes a standalone environmental chapter that is enforceable on the environment. It is Canada's most ambitious one so far in a free trade agreement. The core obligations of member countries are to pursue and enforce domestic environment laws, to, again, ensure that companies or persons do not deviate from these laws for personal gain, and that all of this is transparent for public information. Mr. Speaker, there's an endangered species and wildlife conservation clause. The New York Times estimate is that the illegal wildlife industry is at a blooming $20 billion per year in profits. Mr. Speaker, the TPP, in this case the CPTPP, takes steps to ensure that this, along with other malicious practices such as overfishing, stop by means of penalties in the form of sanctions against persons or parties engaged in these activities. Finally, ozone. The TPP recognizes that emissions of certain ozone layers, and whenever we say TPP, Mr. Speaker, we do mean the CPTPP as defined originally. Emissions of certain substances can significantly deplete and otherwise modify the ozone layer in a manner that is likely to result in adverse effects on human health in the environment. As part of this, the CPTPP protects the ozone layer by limiting the production of certain harmful substances under the banned by the Montreal Protocol, such as refrigerants, coolants, and aerosol can propellants. Furthermore, this pact, this trade agreement, has several political benefits. For example, the original had several disadvantages. For example, $800 million increase in Canadian drug costs that Canada was able to renegotiate out of. And in the CPTPP, we are no longer bound by changed patent laws as part of this agreement. Our patent laws stay the same, which means that Canada's drug costs do not increase by a whopping $800 million per year. Furthermore, the labor rights clause was rewarded. The humanitarian rights clause was rewarded. The environmental clause was made more enforceable. And now, this agreement is one of the best things that can happen to this country, our economy, our people, and everyone around us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister McCrum. The Leader of the Opposition can now begin his rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm having a hard time understanding how the CPTPP is going to have...
Let's call it the TPP.
The TPP is going to have a good impact on Canadians when foreign countries are getting increased labor. Mr. Speaker, Canadian people will lose jobs. Maybe, yes, consumers will get a few cheaper cars because of outsourcing to such places as Japan, which already makes up the majority of the auto industry imports. Mr. Speaker, without tariffs on these imports, there will be no competition. There will be no free trade. Correction, there will be free trade, no competition. There already is massive competition, Mr. Speaker, and without it there will be no competition. All this outsourcing will cause cheaper imports to cars, meaning thousands upon thousands of manufacturing jobs in the auto industry alone will be destroyed. 58,000 in the first year alone, Mr. Speaker, in the auto industry. Not to disclose, correction, not only to say that the dairy industry, which makes up quite large percentage of our GDP capita, will lose 250 million liters of milk in the first year alone. $300 million of revenue gone in the first year, Mr. Speaker.
Where's that milk gonna go?
It's going to be gone, Mr. Speaker. It's going to be outsourced to foreign countries.
We're deporting cows now?
Mr. Speaker, when the government puts free trade on imports, which from countries such as New Zealand, which makes up a large portion of the dairy market, we will be importing a lot more milk, which will be a lot less competition, Mr. Speaker. Now, we would like to iterate a counter plan to strengthen the ties with the North American Free Trade Agreement. Mr. Speaker, now that the United States is out of the TPP, as we know, which is completely changing the agreement, they also wanted to change the ties of NAFTA. We should be focusing our ties on NAFTA, Mr. Speaker. As for NAFTA, the United States makes up the majority of the economy of the world. China also makes up the majority of the economy. These two countries alone make up the most economy in the entire world. Why are we focusing on countries such as Vietnam, Mexico, and Peru, Mr. Speaker, when we should be focusing on our strongest trading partner in the world, the United States, our border? It borders us, Mr. Speaker. If we have free trade with the strongest economy in the world, Mr. Speaker, that will get us, our economy, growing insanely compared to what the TPP will do. As we know, TPP, I'm referring to the CTPP. CTPP. Mr. Speaker, NAFTA will open the doors to the biggest, strongest trading partner in the world, the United States.
Rule 131.
Mr. Speaker, if we do not open the doors to the United States and we open up to other countries such as Japan, Peru, all these countries, all the corporations will outsource their products all over the world to get cheaper products so the Canadian government can import cheaper things, lowering prices for consumers, but getting rid of manufacturing jobs, other jobs in the dairy industry, other jobs in the egg market. All of this will collapse, Mr. Speaker. We're going to lose. This will lose, Mr. Speaker. Our economy does not go up. How does our economy go up if more people are losing jobs, Mr. Speaker? Consumers do not win if they're not employed. That's why this resolution must not succeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. Before I invite the Prime Minister to do his final rebuttal, I would like to remind all debaters that the Prime Minister's final 2-minute speech is protected time, and therefore there will be no heckling during this time. Mr. Prime Minister, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government would first like to go through a few rebuttals of the points made by our loyal opposition. The first is the point that in the automotive industry, a lot of the jobs will be outsourced to Japan because of the cheaper cars and as well the parts. But as the government has stated in a study conducted by Mechleans.ca, with lower production costs, the sector's output in fact becomes more competitive because it exports more and hires more workers as a consequence. Instead of costing jobs in the auto sector, lower import costs actually increase employment. Just for an example. As well, the government would like to reiterate our points of how the CPTPP has a wide range of benefits, expanding different industries and different topics. For example, the economic benefits, as stated before, with access to more customers, with as well benefits to the industry, not only in the automotive, but also the dairy industry. As we also stated that it will gain $135.1 million as a result of the market access given to other CPTPP members. Besides from the economy of Canada, while the opposition has pointed out that some jobs may be lost because of the agreement, in fact, a lot of more jobs will be created, and the economy will be boosted because we're doing trade with so many more people. It strengthens and deepens economic ties, not only for 5 years or 10 years, but for forever how long it will last. Because now these specific bordering countries will have strong relationships with Canada. And furthermore, we'd like to reiterate the humanitarian benefits that come with the TPP, from labor rights to minimum wages, and as well the environment, our earth, that we must protect, from the ozone to overfishing to the selling of illegal animals. All of this comes under the chapters of the CPTPP, which is why the government strongly believes that we should ratify immediately. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. This does conclude the debate. However, to give the judges a little time to collect their notes, I would like to take this time to introduce and thank our timekeeper for the day. So if you'd like to stand up and introduce yourself to the crowd, Flight Corporal
Chowdhury.
Pardon?
Chowdhury.
Chowdhury. Flight Corporal Chowdhury, thank you very much for keeping time today. Like I said, this does conclude our debates. I would like to ask the government if they would like to offer a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We'd first like to start off by thanking you, Mr. Speaker, for such an awesome job at moderating and taking our points very well. And thank you for looking over the debate. After all, you are the moderator. Thank you very much. Our honorable opponents across the floor for giving us such a wonderful debate. Thank you, round of applause. We'd also really like to thank our parents that came out to support us today, that drove us here, that helped us emotionally, mentally, always making sure to remind us that we should always put in our best effort. And of course, our escort officer, Lieutenant Radford, thank you for being here with us. And finally, well, the judges, our esteemed judges, for monitoring our debate, for marking it, for making sure it's judged fairly. And thank you very much for a wonderful debate, and thank you to all our audience in the gallery.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Would the opposition like to second that vote of thanks?
Yes, thank you again to the Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Thank you to the government who put up a good fight really well. Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you guys. All you guys for coming out. Thanks. It's our first time here. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. To all our judges as well. Thank you for giving us a good time today. Good debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. Thank you, Government. Thank you, Opposition. Thank you, Timekeeper. Thank you, cadets, parents, officers, judges. I now declare this debate to close.
At this time, I would like to recognize the top speaker of the House, Warrant Officer Second Class Michael Beliveau. So, third place team is Team Juliet from 246 Squadron. With your medals, please. Second place is 724 Squadron Tango, making first place 800 Squadron X-Ray. Speaker of the House, please, from Tango, please come forward.